Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Game Slice 2021. We are here with Christian Allen, who is going to help us out with a presentation and show us 5 shipping lessons with for indie devs. And we're going to pull in Allen right now in his presentation. And Allen, I'm just going to let you go.
Everybody, my name's Christian Allen with Epic Games, and I first want to say thanks to GameSlice for having me here today. Excited to talk to a group of wonderful indie game developers. I hope you've been enjoying the presentations and had a chance to check out some early access to other indie games. So the talk I'm going to be giving today is called 5 Shipping Lessons for Indie Devs. As I mentioned, I am an evangelist at Epic Games, and my role as an evangelist is, first off, I spend about 30% of my time explaining to people what my role as an evangelist is. The rest of the time, I split my time between telling everybody how amazing Unreal Engine and all of Epic Games' other services are. Split between that and helping indie devs ship the game. So I talk to indie devs in all stages of development, from early concept all the way up to shipping, post-shipping, launch, in all aspects of game development. So that kind of informs you. I've been doing this for about 4 years, and I'll talk about my history before that. These 5 lessons are stuff that I've just condensed down from all those interactions, as well as my own personal experience, into things that folks don't think about necessarily when it comes to specifically shipping, which ideally is the most important feature of your game. If all your other features are amazing and great and you don't hit the shipping feature, then generally you won't generate much revenue or buzz for your game if you never ship it. So that being said, I'm just going to jump right into it. I'm going to try to keep this right at 35 minutes, which gives me about 6 minutes per lesson. So hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A. So hopefully I don't go too fast or too slow, but we'll see how it goes. So my background, as I mentioned, I've been in the industry for quite a while now. I started out as actually a modder in the late 90s, and then parlayed that into a game development role. I'm a game designer by trade. So I started out at Ubisoft. I was there for about 5 years, and then I moved on to Bungie here in Seattle. I was there for a couple years. Warner Brothers, at WB Games, which is now basically Monolith here in Seattle. I've also done some consulting work for a bunch of companies that I actually can't mention, but one I can mention is Overbrook Entertainment, which is Will Smith's production company, working on the After Earth franchise. After that, I started my own studio. So I actually went the indie route, did crowdfunding and all that, shipped multiple games across multiple platforms. I did that for about 5 years. And then in 2017, I joined Epic in my current role as an evangelist. Games that I've worked on, again, at Ubisoft, I focused on the Clancy franchise. So I started as a game designer, worked a little bit on Rainbow Six, then moved over to my primary focus, which was the Ghost Recon franchise, primarily on Xbox. So I worked as lead designer and creative director on that. Up through from Island Thunder up through Future Soldier, with a little bit of work on Predator and Advanced Warfighter with Future Soldier. At Bungie, I worked on as design lead on Halo Reach. At Warner Brothers, I worked on multiple different titles, the ones you've heard of. Mad Max. Also did early prototyping on Lord of the Rings, which eventually grew into the Middle Earth Shadows of Mordor franchise. Independent, as Cerulean, we shipped Takedown Red Saber on Xbox 360 and PC. After Earth was a mobile game. And also at Cerulean, shipped Epsilon into PC on early access, which unfortunately never got out of early access, and Hotel Blind, which was an experimental VR game. And then in my role at Epic, I've had a chance to interface on several of the different games that Epic puts out as well, a couple which you might have heard of recently. So let's jump right into the tips. We're at 12:04, so I have exactly 31 minutes to get through each 5 of these. I'm going to kind of just blow through them. Got a few anecdotes, not a ton of text on slides, just a lot of me talking, and hopefully these will be helpful. So the first one is preparing for your platforms. This is something that I run into a lot with indie devs. Where they don't necessarily plan ahead or think ahead when it comes to the platforms that you're going to be shipping on. And when I talk about platforms, there's kind of two things that you need to think about as a developer. The first off, on the right here is kind of your basic platform as far as the user interface or the primary way the player is going to be interacting with your game. The large majority of indie devs, when they start on projects, they're primarily working on PC, and that's how they just kind of default into what platform they're working on. Since they're developing on PC, they tend to just go right into PC. They may have ideas for mobile or VR. Or console down the line, but you need to identify what your primary platform from a development standpoint, primarily from a user interface standpoint. What is your primary way that the player is interfacing with your game? Obviously, changing between mouse and keyboard and a touchscreen interface on a phone or a controller, or even more so VR. Can be a challenge. So you need to identify those things up front, so you're not wasting a lot of time and polishing features and interfaces for one interface paradigm and then having to switch it over. But also from just a performance optimization, how big's your project going to be? Obviously, there's limitations when it comes to things like mobile, console, VR. And on PC, obviously, covering a wide variety of devices and things like that. So identifying that early on from a development standpoint is important, but also from a production standpoint, when we're talking about platforms, here's where we get into what platforms are you actually going to ship on, or what platforms are you going to have the capability to ship on, even if you're not planning on shipping on them right now. Obviously, things like PC are relatively straightforward. You can develop on PC, you can push things out on itch or Epic Games Store or Steam. There are some steps that you need to do for some of those platforms, GOG as well. And you need to take those into consideration. But more planning needs to come about when you start talking about things like consoles. Those are generally closed platforms. So in order to ship on, PlayStation, Xbox, Switch, you need to have permission and the SDKs to be able to cook out and ship on those platforms. That process can take a while, depending on your timing and when you're coming into it and the processes. You want to be reaching out to those platform holders earlier rather than later. They all have different processes. For example, ID at Xbox has a pretty straightforward online portal that you can go to, sign up, fill out. There's a bunch of different forms that you can fill out that describe your title, describe who you are. You go through the process and get approved on the platform. Nintendo and PlayStation also have their own requirements to get approved on the platform. And if you're shipping on something like Epic Games using the online services, there are some forms and things that you need to fill out to get access to that content, although that's a much smaller process. A lot of developers will kind of put those things off and say, well, I don't know if I'm going to ship on console, so I'll just wait. But there can be a large lag time between when you kind of apply or sign up to be on those products and when you're approved. The way the process works, at least for Unreal Engine developers, is once they're approved on the platform, an email is actually auto-generated from, say, ID at Xbox that goes over to Epic and says, hey, this developer has, met all the requirements. They're approved to develop on Xbox Series X, and they are now approved. Epic then generates an NDA, sends it to you, you sign that, then you're unlocked, you get the platform SDK that plugs into to Unreal Engine, and you can start actually cooking builds out for that specific platform. But I highly recommend that if you plan to be on a console, or you think you may need to be on the platform on a console, down the line, go ahead and get that stuff out as early as possible. You can do all the legal paperwork and everything that you need to do, get all your checkboxes signed off before you need to buy any hardware. You can do all the kind of paperwork steps first, and then not buy any hardware, wait, down the line if you need to do that. But at least you'll go through the steps and have all the capability. A lot of developers kind of wait on that, and it's like, okay, now it's, I've shipped my PC game and now I'm going to do my console port and I want it out in 2 months. Well, what do I need to do? Okay, well, you needed to start on that possibly 2 months ago. So do that stuff earlier rather than later. And I'll talk a little bit later when it comes to cooking for platforms, some of the things you might run into. But the key aspect is just to, approach that as early as possible if you feel that you're going to have a need to do that. So the next thing would be don't just test, QA. A lot of, obviously all developers and indie devs test the functionality in their game and test whether it works. And that's just kind of a given that you're going to be testing your game. But you need to get yourself into a QA mindset. Now that's kind of regardless of the size of your team. This applies to, a solo dev, working in their spare time after work from home, all the way up to, a 15 person independent double-I studio that's working to ship in the game. You need to have that QA mindset. And by QA, I mean rigorous, methodical testing systems for your game. So the first thing to think about with that, and this is, again, unfortunately, something I run into a lot, is making sure that you're cooking and testing on the platform that you plan to ship on. So if your primary platform is iOS, then you should be doing all of your testing on the iOS. You need to get test flight. You need to get your iOS certification. Like I mentioned with the platforms. Get all that out of the way and actually be testing in the actual space that you're going to be shipping on. There are a lot of, if you're just testing in editor using, say, a touch emulator or something like that, you're not getting the true experience, whether it be from a performance standpoint. The editor may be carrying a lot of baggage as far as performance in the background. So you're, maybe trying to optimize things that you don't necessarily need to optimize. There's a lot of reasons that you need to be testing on the actual platform. And that applies to PC as well. Just because you're on PC and all your interfaces are the same between your editor and your cook build, you still need to go through that cooking process, cook out a build, get that set up and actually do your testing in the build. Don't do your functional QA testing in an editor environment. I run into a lot of devs that, again, they wait till the last minute to kind of do this. It's like, okay, I've got everything working. It's functional. Now I need to roll forward into cooking out builds. And now I've run into, this problem or that problem. I need to, move around how I, have my file structure set up in order to properly cook. How are you going to deploy it? Say if you're shipping on Steam, what's your developer environment look like for actually deploying a build up to the store platform and having your testers or your team re-download that build? There's a lot of reasons why this is important. And it's simple. It's very easy to, you implement something, you test it in editor, it works, it's good to go. You cross your fingers, you move on to the next feature. But you should have that QA mindset of putting into your pipeline of, okay, now we're going to do a test run on that feature. One of the examples I like to use on this wasn't an Unreal Dev, but it was in another technology. I just ran across it on Twitter recently, where a developer was implementing kind of like an achievement system. So basically, as the player did different actions in the game, they would get a pop-up that would say, hey, you just, completed this task, and if you complete 40 more of those tasks, you're going to get a badge. And it would just be a little pop-up. It was kind of an in-game reward system. They're implementing it. It was an early access game, so they're in the middle. They implemented the system. They kind of tested it locally, and their goal was to kind of quietly put it out and see how people reacted to it. And so they implemented it. They cooked out a build. They uploaded it to Steam. They made it live, and then they just kind of waited and watched, and were just seeing what people were going to say about this feature and see if people, how were reacting. They were checking, their back-end data to see how many people were unlocking things. And people weren't unlocking things. They weren't talking about it. There wasn't a lot of feedback. And they kind of went out into the forums and said, hey, what's your feedback on this? Did you like it? Did you not like it? And people are like, what are you talking about? We have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. Well, it turned out, due to packaging errors or somewhere along the lines, the feature was functioning as intended. It was keeping track of things. It was up, it was doing it all. But the fonts and the text that they used to display their UI elements cooked out in the cook build transparent. So users just could not see the actual physical pop-ups. They just physically weren't there. And if the developer had just done a standard QA pass of cooking out a build before they uploaded it to Steam, cooking out a build, rerunning it on their local machine, going through verifying the pop-ups were actually working, they would have saved themselves a lot of time in retrospect of trying to kind of stealth launch this feature. And that kind of leads into the next idea. If you get this image reference, then you're probably old and curmudgeon-y like me. This is an amusing ad that ran on TV about how testing games work, about polishing up your content on level 3. But what I mean by having a stage test group is, again, no matter how indie you are, down to a solo developer all the way up to a big team, you generally have a group of folks, whether it's family and friends or your fan community, your Discord group, your forums, of people that are kind of technical minded and test minded. So identifying a small group of them to be a functional stage test group, where before you launch it to your larger group of play testers or early adopters or early access or crowdfunding or whoever it may be, just to get some eyes on and do some functional test runs of that actual product. Obviously, automated build testing is a powerful tool to be able to just have an automated system that actually just runs the build and generates performance results and information and crash tests and things like that. But having a group of people where you can say, hey, specifically we want you to go and look at the achievement system, or specifically we want you to go and just double check and make sure that online connectivity, that joining a match is still working as function, because that's what we changed with this build and we just like to get some eyes on. And whether that's 5 people or 10 people or 100 people, having that kind of stage test group that's not your development team. Ideally you have a whole separate QA team, but in the indie space that's not always the case. But having someone that's separate from your dev that can go out and say, okay, a build is live on Steam in the beta section. So go download that, make sure you can run it. Is it good to go? Check these things. Awesome. Can be just a huge time saver. And it'll help your team, when you're down in the weeds and you're pushing out a build, or you're crunching to put out a hot fix or something like that, your head's down, things can be very overwhelming. So having that separate set of eyes just for an over-the-shoulder check to make sure things are solid and functional before you push them out to a larger group can be very important. And in order to facilitate that functionality in testing, using forms, I think, can be very, very valuable. People will tend to do the easiest route possible. So if you ask a group of people, hey, please take a look at this build and make sure it works, chances are what you'll get a lot of yes, it works, or no, it's broke. So having a form that at least kind of guides their feedback to, hey, in this form, first you have to fill out what build you have. Verify that you got, build.4.26.1.1 that was released on this date. Okay, fill that out. One, that's a check to make sure that they actually did correct the right, download the right build, or receive the right build, and make sure that you uploaded the right build. What are your hardware specs that you're checking on? What's your graphics card? What's your PC? What kind of controller are you using? Having that information kind of, one, verifies that they have the correct, setup, and can lead to help you track down issues later. If you start getting a bunch of, bug reports or fail reports from a certain amount of people, and you notice, oh, they're all using this graphics card. Okay, that can be, a lead. But it also puts people in the mindset of actually providing functional information. So just simply requiring, hey, I had a problem. This was the problem. These are the steps that I used to reproduce those problems. Now, you don't necessarily need to or should expect them to write everything like professional QA testers, but just having them in that mindset of, I had this crash and this is what I did to get to that crash. I started the game and I went in here and I, loaded a save game 30 times in a row. Okay, well, if that's the crash on, time 30, then maybe it's not a huge priority, but it's something we can look at later. It just gives you that extra information. And again, puts them in the mindset to provide the best information that you can. You may feel that's a little onerous. A lot of times these people are volunteers and you're asking for your time, but communicate to yourself and to them that they are helping you provide a better product to them and to the rest of the community. So if they're going to spend the time doing testing for you, it's worth your time and it's worth their time to spend a few extra minutes to make sure that the information that's getting communicated to you and your team is valuable and useful and actionable. So, there's a lot of different applications that you can use for this, whether it be, a bug tracking system like Jira or, a Trello type system, things like that. There's a lot of different organizational methods. Use what works best for you, but it's something that I highly recommend. So tip number 3, announce early and release later. Originally, I just had later. Now I said later than you think. This really is about some overall trends that I've seen over the past few years. I don't have a lot of slides or bullet points on this, but there's a huge amount of questions. When do I announce? When's the best time to announce? How should I announce? What's the magic way to announce? The magic time to announce? All of that is obviously subjective. There's folks that have, announced with nothing and generated a ton of buzz. There are folks that have announced with tons of content and completely fallen off the radar. I am definitely not a magic whiz on how to, market or utilize social media. But I do find that where you don't want to be is generally, especially if you're self-publishing, announcing extremely late, announcing a month before you launch, and you're going out and, trying to build buzz, trying to build relationships with press or streamers or content creators or the fan base of that specific genre. The longer lead run that you have up to that to build out your community and your social media channels and your communication channels with fans of the genre, fans of your studio, those kinds of things. Generally, the earlier, the better. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to announce everything of your game like as soon as it comes online. Some of that is dependent on, say, what your funding source is going to be, what your goal for development is. If your goal for development is to pitch to a publisher and get development budget from them, then probably you do want to hold a lot of what your game is behind closed doors. Because a lot of times if you've, done a lot of announce, sometimes publishers aren't as excited about that. It's like, oh, it's already out there. You've already stolen the thunder maybe from, what our initial announce will be, things like that. But that doesn't mean you can't announce your studio, announce who you are, announce what you're doing, announce what maybe genre you're working in. Hey, we're 4 friends that, have been playing RTS games all of our lives. And, we just love this specific genre and we're really excited about, jumping into it. So here's our studio logo and maybe, here's our working project name. And if you're a fan of this genre, you should follow us and we'd love to interact with you. And here are some games I love, whatever it may be. Crowdfunding, obviously, building up to that crowdfunding launch is a launch in and of itself. That's a whole other talk. Having a demo or, gameplay playthrough, things like that can be important, and not releasing those things to get the ultimate splash out of your crowdfunding campaign is important. And then some people take the full route of they're just full on online development of here's everything we're doing, here's the animation test I did today, here's the gray box, here's the bug, the thing that I broke today. So it's really up to you what level of announce that you want to do. But again, I do recommend doing it sooner rather than later. So moving on to release. This one I've struggled with a lot is release later than you think. Basically, in the initial planning phase, when you're thinking about your announce and scheduling, put buffer into that. You don't need to necessarily announce a date on day one. If you're going to be a year and a half out, you don't need to announce, hey, our release date is next year on October 23rd. You can say fall of next year or sometime in the next 2 years or when it's ready. You can generally keep that window open as long as possible. To where you're not locking down that date as far as, announcing that date until you get closer to the date. Because if you don't lock in a specific date, then you don't have to announce a delay on that specific date, which sometimes people take as a negative when it may not even be a negative. As we've seen, sometimes you announce delays and people go, "Oh no, the development is in trouble," and sometimes it might not have anything to do with that. Sometimes it might be a strategic delay. We're in a digital world. This isn't a retail release, and as an indie developer, you are empowered and you are the most agile that you can be. And the more indie you are, the more nimble and agile you can be. So if you're releasing your open world fantasy RPG that you've built on second week of October, and you find out that Bethesda's coming out with their next big open world RPG that same week, a couple months out, maybe you shouldn't release it that week. Maybe you should push it out a month. Maybe you should pull it up a month. Maybe you should switch that date around. If you have an opportunity to take advantage, of some marketing opportunity or hardware, which is what I'm going to talk about next, you want to have that flexibility. So leaving that trail in there as long as possible as far as announcing. And then also just scheduling in or planning ahead just from a product development standpoint of, hey, this is my plan date, but what happens if I don't meet that? When am I going to push those dates out? When am I going to push that time out? Having that built in to your schedule and your personal and emotional planning, which I'll talk a little bit about again in tip number 5. But understanding that those things happen, and planning that in there is important. All right, I am at 30 minutes. 27 minutes. So the next tip is to be ready for marketing opportunities. And when I say marketing opportunities, basically, again, coming back to that concept that as an indie developer, you can be and hopefully should be extremely nimble and agile to keep an eye out for different marketing opportunities. And what I mean by that is these could be opportunities when it comes to social media. It could be a new up and coming streamer that you find out is really into the genre that you're working on, and you can reach out to them and give them maybe early access, get them involved into the process. But also recognizing things like technological capabilities and opportunities. The example here, I got 2 examples on screen. I'll talk through each one. First is there's a game called Bright Memory, and there's a few different games that took advantage, including this title, that took advantage of RTX on the NVIDIA graphics card. So when NVIDIA came out with RTX capability, it was obviously very powerful. We enabled it in Unreal Engine and put it out to developers. And I was really impressed about how a lot of independent game developers were able to implement RTX into their games very quickly. And not necessarily, these were games that were in development, so it wasn't necessarily going live within a few weeks, but they were basically able to get an early version of RTX into their game as a prototype standpoint and create content that showcased the RTX capabilities in Unreal Engine and in their game to a way that NVIDIA was like, I want to showcase that. So this is one example. Grimstar was another example. There were a lot of the early showcases for games actually utilizing RTX were indie game developers. And that's because they were very able to quickly implement the feature to a point where it could be demonstrated, it could be showed off, and they got a lot of marketing boost and basically free marketing from a company like NVIDIA that were showcasing these games on their social media channels and on their YouTube channel and all those things. just because they were able to be nimble and agile. You know, a AAA game development studio with hundreds and hundreds of people and all sorts of business relationships, you know, a feature like RTX comes out, even if they are going to support it, it's going to take them months because they didn't announce, you know, day one when NVIDIA launched it or announced it. They're not going to announce it day one. They have to wait to make sure that, you know, it's going to be good to go. You know, it's going to line up with their launch dates on PC. Do they have other, you know, relationships with other hardware companies that maybe they are going to support it, but they don't want to showcase it because of all these different things? Does it fit within their marketing schedule? All those things. They aren't able to very quickly go, oh yeah, this is an opportunity to market our game. Yes, we have it. Hey, NVIDIA, would you like to showcase our game? You know, there's a lot of opportunities like that. You know, I have seen multiple indies get showcased on things like the PlayStation Network because they were able to get into a launch window on the PlayStation Store. Excuse me, I'm gonna have a drink. I'm talking real fast. Sorry, I'll slow it down a little bit. They were able to get into a launch window where there just wasn't a lot else going on. And so because of that, PlayStation showcased their games a lot more than they normally would for an indie game on the PlayStation Store. So there's a lot of opportunities like that. Obviously, you know, Steam showcases, ID at Xbox runs different things like that. So knowing when those are, knowing when they're coming up, and being responsive and having the capability to respond to those and take advantage of them is important. Another example, the image from the lower right is actually me at PAX a few years ago. So on Epsilon, we were actually one of the first games to implement Razer's chroma functionality, where the game would actually react to the lighting on the keyboard and the accessories, to where things like when you got shot, your keyboard would flash red, it would light up and reactive to the game. Because of that, I was able to finagle that into Razer, allowing us to demo the game. Razer also was very supportive, sent us hardware, you know, helped us out with code and stuff like that. But I was actually able to showcase the game at Razer's booth at PAX, so I didn't have to buy a booth, I didn't have to provide any hardware. I just showed up and boom, I was on the floor at PAX. So that was a great example of taking advantage of those marketing opportunities. What the image is showing is that, you know, I'm sitting here demoing, and there was some open booths next to me, and all of a sudden a huge crowd of people showed up, and there's all these cameras, and they're going, and this person jumped on. I think the station next to me was playing Dark Souls. They're playing the game. All these people are taking pictures of them. I had no idea who this person was. I just kind of sat there and had that look on my face, and it turned out it was PewDiePie. Now, had I known who PewDiePie was at the time, and had I known, you know, that he was going to be on the floor, whatever, I should have been ready to pivot and go, hey, streamer with a bazillion followers, would you like to try my game while you're here? But I wasn't prepared for that, and wasn't able to take care of that opportunity to get a whole ton of extra eyes onto my game. So, you know, you need to keep up with the trends of, you know, who the, you know, the popular streamers, the popular outlets, those things are. And if you don't have the capability to do that, ideally, you know, reaching out to your community, ideally hiring a community manager or social media manager to find out, you know, hey, is that person next to you Ninja? You know, are they the top streamer on Twitch that, you know, she or he can help you promote your game? There's a lot of opportunities like that if you're knowledgeable and you're nimble, you can take advantage of. And if you're clueless, like I was at this point, I was not able to take advantage of. All right. So last tip before we get wrap and get into Q&A. We're right at 33 minutes. So every indie game is games as a service. Now, games as a service is this kind of buzzword that some people love and some people hate. It seems to be that VC investors love it and gamers tend to hate it. But what I mean by it in this case is that as an indie game developer, you generally cannot just launch your game and be done. That will generally not happen. The example image that I have here is, I love this picture. It just makes me think of shipping indie games. This is one of the NASA tests, and as the ship is exploding on screen, they've got the Starship has landed, and it's like everything's going great. This test flight is awesome. While meanwhile, the luckily unmanned spaceship is detonating on the landing platform. And to me, this is representative of shipping an indie game, because if your indie game does amazing, that's just going to be an insanely more amount of work that's going to happen post-launch than if your game does mediocre. Now, if your game does awful, that's going to be a lot of work too. If things go out and they're broken and there's bugs all over the place and you have a ton of things to fix that you didn't anticipate, obviously that's going to be a lot of work. But if your game explodes and all of a sudden you need to be doing, a million press interviews that week while you're also trying to stage your first hotfix for, the gamers that are using AZERTY keyboards in Eastern Europe, and you didn't realize that your game was going to be popular in that region and you didn't support that keyboard layout, so now you need to do it. Now you're trying to juggle 15 different things. But really, the idea here is that people have an expectation of indie game developers of being responsive. They think of you as not being this, cold, calculating corporate, group. They want things to be responded to quickly. Now, whether that means that you are fixing, it doesn't mean that necessarily, at 2 a.m. after launch, you're up, patching a bug so that you can try to ship a hotfix at 6 a.m. the next morning, but being responsive of like, hey, we've seen your issue, we've identified your issue, and it's going to be fixed in our first patch. Or really glad you're enjoying that feature. I've heard your criticism of it, and we can look into whether we can fix that as a future. Generally, what I would not recommend would be to crunch your last month right up until the hour before shipping, upload it to Steam and then just go sleep for 3 days and come back and see how it went. That is generally a recipe for disaster. Either, again, not being able to take advantage of opportunities that come up if everything's going awesome, or not being able to fix critical issues or address that you're going to fix critical issues that may come up post-launch. So what does that mean? That may mean in your schedule, as hard as it may be, doing a traditional AAA style, Gold Master lockdown, planning a month before launch to lock down, do that stage test group, lock it down, and just say, now I'm going to take 2 weeks off, recharge my batteries, and get myself into that launch mindset, get out of that development mindset of, fix feature, improve feature, fix bug, into that launch thing of, okay, we're going to put the product out. We're going to see what people actually identify as problems, what people identify as good things, where we can expand on features, things like that. Whether it be for, Title 2, whether it be for DLC Pack 1, whether it be for ongoing live episodic content, whatever it may be. But plan that in both from just a scheduling perspective, a cost perspective, and a personal health perspective and mental health perspective of giving yourself a window pre-launch to kind of reset, be ready to go, and launch into it. And this a lot is, again, from experience of, I just last week had multiple devs that were on calls with me days before shipping, trying to sort out issues or to deal with marketing opportunities where, maybe, I hadn't heard about their game, and I'd be like, hey, I'd love to be able to share some stuff with this. And they're like, too busy fixing bugs. It's like, okay, well, let me know when you're done, and I can help amplify your game. Until then, I'll just hit retweet on what you got going. So yes. So by thinking of it as a games as a service really just means having that post-launch window of, whether it be a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, have that built into your schedule, have that built into your planning phase, and really do think of it. Shipping a game is not the end of the road, unless, all the complete stars align and everything just goes out smooth and you're just going to be cashing checks and reaping praise. But even cashing checks and reaping praise means now you got to get your taxes sorted out. So there's always going to be a run after launch that you need to consider. So with that, I do want to wrap up. I am a few minutes over, but I do want to have time for Q&A, and I want to touch, because I am an Unreal evangelist that works for Epic Games, I want to touch on a couple resources for developers that may be interested in the Unreal Engine. First is Unreal Indies. This is a portal that you can go to that has contact information for all the evangelists around the world, as well as a direct email address and other resources for indies. Next, when it comes to Unreal Engine, if you don't know about it, you can download and use the Unreal Engine at no cost to you. The royalties associated with Unreal Engine do not kick in until you reach $1 million in gross revenue. So when you hit $1 million that you've made, that's when you need to reach out to me. We'll talk about royalty reporting and things like that. If you have any questions or concerns on that, you can hit the FAQ at unrealengine.com/FAQ. Next, Unreal Engine Learning. This is all free content, video content. You can go sign up. You can watch a lot of courses on different elements of Unreal development. You can unlock badges if you're a student to share on LinkedIn, things like that, track your tutorials, all those things. Check it out. It's completely free. And last but not least, Epic Mega Grants is a $100 million fund where we give grants to developers in a range of different content, games, film, academia, open source, all sorts of different things. But for indie game developments, indie game developers, there are specifically grants available to you to help you and give you a leg up. So go to unrealengine.com/megagrants and check that out. With that, my name is Christian Allen. I want to say a big thanks to GameSlice. You can follow me at Twitter at Cerealin. For professional contact, I prefer LinkedIn. You can search Christian Allen Game Designer. Both on Twitter and on LinkedIn, I am Christian Allen the Game Designer, not Christian Allen the MMA fighter. So if the photo is completely ripped with a shirt off, that's probably not me. I don't do Instagram. Facebook is just for my family and close friends. So those are the two routes to get a hold of me, and we'll probably end up on email or jump on a call anyway. My DMs are open on Twitter if you have any questions about indie game development, Unreal Engine, or the greater Epic Game system, Epic Games ecosystem, Epic Games Store, Epic Mega Grants, all that fun stuff. Quixel, feel free to reach out to me. And with that, I'll hand it over to the moderator for Q&A. Thank you very much.